o'clock, so I will call the meeting of the Albany Finance Advisory Committee to order. We have a roll call.
Okay. Member Kerr?
Yes, here.
Chair Priven?
Here.
Member Papalia?
Here.
And Member Trainer?
Here.
And Vice Chair Bowman is absent.
Okay, also the final part of agenda item 1 is the land acknowledgement. Is there anyone who would like to read that?
Ready. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lisjan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home.
Thank you very much. Next, agenda item 2, approval of the minutes from June 5th, 2024. Any comments on the minutes?
I move that we approve.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Can we get a vote?
Okay. Member Kerr?
Yes.
Chair Priven?
Yes.
Member Papalia?
Yes.
Member Trainer?
Yes.
And Bowman is absent. Motion passes.
Okay, moving right along. Agenda item 3, announcements. First, staff, any announcements?
Good evening, committee members. Raina Schwartz, your interim finance director. Welcome back from our summer break. Council came back yesterday evening. We came back this evening, and everybody's trying to remember all the details of running the technology of the meeting. So thank you for being here. The only thing I would have under announcements is really just to say we are well underway with closing out last fiscal year and preparing for the audit. The auditors will be here on site the first full week in October, so the week of October 7th. And we are looking forward to having them. We are going to be ready for them to be here, and we're excited about it. So looking forward to another successful audit, and you will hear the budget side of it when we get to the budget item. Cassie, do you have any announcements?
Okay, excited for the budget. I mean, for the audit. You don't hear that very often.
It's been our focus for the past couple months, so.
Any announcements from committee members? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Item 4, public comment. We don't have anyone in person. Is there any? Okay.
Greg Bone, you may speak and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Welcome back, FAC, from summer. I relocated to the East Coast, so it's about 10 o'clock East Coast time. A bit of good news. On July 15th of this year, CalPERS reported a preliminary 23-24 return of 9.3%, which is good. The discount rate is currently 6.8%, so I think that's a bit of good news. They're valuing assets at about $502.9 billion. And the perf funded status now is at 75% according to their news release. Now, the preliminary figures, as always, do not include private market asset returns. They lag by about 1 quarter, so I would think in about 30 days or so we'll have a finalized number on the 23-24 returns. So that's all I have under public comment, and welcome back, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to agenda item number 5, presentations. So 5-1, the fourth quarter / year-end budget review.
Thank you. While Cassie is bringing up the PowerPoint with hopefully not too much technology confusion, which it's a good thing we practiced bringing up the technology earlier because we had to remind ourselves, so that was fun. So what's before you this evening is essentially a preliminary look at the year-end, fourth quarter and year-end for fiscal year 23-24. You'll see many places in the report. You may have noticed that it reminds all of us that these are unaudited numbers. And so the expectation should be that there will be changes, period, end of discussion. There will be changes to these numbers. We do our best, if we can go to the next slide, we do our best to pull preliminary but substantial numbers about this time in the year, but always want to remind folks that things can change both as we finalize all of our work and the auditors complete their work as well. However, the good news is that we are in substantially better shape than we anticipated for ending fiscal year 23-24. The budget was adopted showing a potential deficit of $1.3 million. Rather than that, we have a surplus of approximately $1 million, a little over $1 million. Which is due both to stronger than anticipated revenues in a few categories and spending, savings, some on the labor side, some on the services and supplies side, that occurred across the bulk of the departments. So both of those pieces lend us to a much better position than we thought we would be in. However, there are still some, let's say, caution signs along the roadway, right? If we think of this as a roadway going forward, there are still a few flashing yellow lights, maybe a flagger standing there holding a flag. But overall, I think generally a much more positive picture. I will say, as our public commenter mentioned, CalPERS has released, they released a little while ago their preliminary results for FY24. That number isn't going to make that much of a difference for any of our short-term costs associated with CalPERS. The annual normal cost, which is a percentage of payroll, doesn't change a lot from year to year. The unfunded accrued liability shifts a little bit more with some of these changes in investment status, but there are also other pieces to the puzzle, as you've heard from the GovInvest folks who have given us a presentation, that all affect what that number looks like. So not a lot of change. We won't see anything significant in FY25 for the CalPERS as a result of what's been released. And as we look at FY26 and 27, it will really depend on both the performance in FY25, but also demographic changes, other changes in the pieces and parts of the formula that go into calculating those liabilities. So looking a little more deeply, next slide please, into the revenue slide. Revenues, as I mentioned, were in fact overall better than anticipated in most categories. Particularly, property tax came in pretty much flat on to what we expected. Sales tax is also very close to the budget. This is good news for this year. We'll see as we start to get into FY25 what that looks like with Golden Gate Fields closing and any of the other economic changes that we're seeing. One area that had a more significant increase over the budget were franchise and other taxes. Some of that is due to the increases associated with Measure DD, and there's a little bit more conversation in the report about that. Greater than anticipated increase associated with the changes that were put in place under Measure DD, but also business license taxes as well, and some of the other more minor taxes in that category. Licenses and permits, were also a bit higher, mostly on the construction side. So both encroachment permits and construction permits, that hopefully will continue. We don't know, but the Bay Area continues to have a strong housing market, somewhat regardless of what happens. I mean, it occasionally takes a dip, but honestly, a very robust real estate market. The other area that we have talked about that shows a significant increase over budget is more an artifact of timing than anything else, and that's the payment for the first year of the Memorandum of Understanding with UC Berkeley. That $400,000 payment, that has been added to the budget for FY25, so you won't see a difference actual to budget. That will come in even at budget. But for FY24, it shows up as unanticipated or unbudgeted revenues. It should be noted, however, that that's, when it shows up in 24 looking like a boon, that's essentially a one-time function because it's just against what had been in the budget. It's not we're now counting on it going forward, so it becomes less of a bonus and more of a baseline.
Raina, if I may, I can hold my question to the end, but I might forget it.
Please don't.
If you could just go back to the last slide for a second. There we go. So you mentioned this is unaudited, and I just wonder if you have any sense of which of these categories might be the most susceptible to changes after an audit. That's my question.
Generally speaking, the audit adjustments that we have seen have honestly been often more on the expense side than the revenue side. Cassie can correct me if I'm wrong. But the second thing is sales and use tax would be the area that I would expect because there are some timing issues with sales and use tax. We are working on making sure that we have the right things allocated to FY24, so you will likely see an adjustment somewhere in the sales tax numbers because of that timing issue. We wish this state would send us our money in a more timely fashion, but they, even asking nicely does not necessarily get us our money any earlier. They send it when they send it. So sales tax would be the most likely for, I think, on the revenue side, where we might see a shift in the numbers. I don't remember seeing last year a lot of we've captured a lot of the other sort of miscellaneous revenue pieces that we hadn't caught in the past, so I don't expect a ton of changes on the revenue side.
Thank you.
You are most welcome. Construction, yay. UC Berkeley memorandum, yay. Transfers in, always a popular topic. We are doing the transfers, as we mentioned, we're now doing them quarterly, so we did the year-end true-up. We're still showing in the estimated year-end results that we will be about $1 million short of what we budgeted. That, I think, is in large part, it's got two components. One is a overly optimistic or aggressive budgeting for some of the kind of administrative overhead transfers for, the fact that those of us in the general fund manage all the special funds, and so the special funds cover overhead, sometimes for projects, sometimes for citywide overhead, but we don't spend nearly what had been in the budget on these overhead activities. And so for FY25, we didn't make any changes because we didn't make a lot of changes to the budget. But for 26 and 27, we will realign that transfer budget so it's more in line with our actual performance over the last several years. I think it's likely that the actual revenue from that will stay at about the level it's been, which is about $5 million, and not at the about $6 million that were budgeted in FY24 and FY25. So just a note on that one, but you'll be able to see it quarterly as we go through the year because we'll be making those transfers quarterly, so you'll be able to see the progress. Where before, as we've discussed, that has waited till way late in the year, and that has been challenging to make it understood. So hopefully that's getting clearer over time as we change some of those practices. On to the expense side. And so expenses are anticipated to be below budget. The report has a table that shows salaries and wages versus other expenses and how far below budget. We are at about, 3% below budget on the labor side and a little higher than that on the other expenses side, which is sometimes the function of projects or anticipated programs that didn't end up costing as much as we anticipated on the other expense side. So again, departments did a good job in controlling their expenses. The couple of places where there were departments that exceeded their budget, they were due to expenses outside of the department's control. And so places where the city is billed for a certain cost, whether that's insurance, whether that's for services associated with, there were some election preparation costs that were unanticipated as we move into as we were moving into preparing for the November 2024 election. So just a few places where departments had challenges, but otherwise very good performance from the departments. We have talked about whether vacancies will continue at the same rate that they have been in the past. And we do have fewer vacancies right now than we have, which is great and won't produce savings the same way. However, things always continue to change. So we were fully staffed in the police department for about 3 minutes. It was more like 3 weeks. But honestly, it might have been 3 minutes. And so we are back to having a vacancy, but we're in the process of filling it. So it is a constant for us to keep working on recruitment and retention, and we'll continue to do so. But I don't think you can expect to see huge labor savings. You'll see in that sort of 3% range, 2.5% to 3.5%, I think, over time, which is pretty typical, but not the higher amounts that maybe we've seen in past years, 22, 23, et cetera. But by the time we hit 24, we're 2 to 3% below on the labor side. So very good performance, and the departments are continuing to look at their budgets during FY25, and I'm already putting together a schedule for the FY26 and 27 budget process, which you would think would be far away, but because the fiscal year just started. But my brain is fully in 3 fiscal years at the moment, so we are well on our way to FY26, which I know terrifies staff who's working on the FY24 audit, because I'm talking about FY26, and they're like, no, don't talk about that. But it's all good. And with that, just kind of in summary, we are pleased to have a more positive picture to provide to you, with the caution that we will know more in a couple of months when the audit is complete, if there are any significant adjustments or differences from the numbers that are being shared with you this evening. But I feel pretty confident that we have a good handle on where we were in FY24, and now it's really a question of looking ahead through this fiscal year and the next two to make sure that our budgets are aligned and balanced, so that we are clear of the likelihood, hopefully, of running a deficit. The goal, certainly for 26 and 27, would be to be showing a balanced budget with all of the components that we need to, so that we know that we're moving forward with those in a strong stance, and not hopefully as concerned about the volatility maybe that we've seen over the last couple of years. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, both of you, and also thank you for the staff report. When I looked through the financials, I had all these questions, and I read the staff report, which I should have done first, and I was like, oh, you answered so many of my questions. So with that, are there any questions? Mm-hmm. Want to go?
Okay. So thanks for this report. It was really interesting to read, and I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, that we ended up with $1 million surplus, because the last time we talked in May, we thought there would be a small deficit. And so I'm just curious as to, and I can see that the franchise and other tax revenue was a big component of that surplus, because that was about $1.2 million over expected budget. And it does look, when you look at the quarterly outline of that from the table, that those numbers stayed really strong in the fourth quarter. And I guess at the time you did the third quarter, you didn't think the numbers were going to be anywhere near that strong. I guess, how did we, I'm trying to reconcile this with the meeting that we attended of council in June. And I know we're going to talk about that in our next budget item, but you know, the council tends to think, well, you know, they project a deficit and then it's a surplus. And we thought it was going to be a deficit as of third quarter, and now we're saying it's going to be $1 million surplus. So I'm just trying to get a handle on, like, why didn't we see this coming, that the franchise and other tax revenue was going to be that much over budget? Was there something that was really strange, that was a really huge surge in that activity in the fourth quarter that wasn't expected?
There wasn't any one thing that was a particular surge in the fourth quarter in that realm, or any of the other realms, quite frankly. One of the things that happened between the third quarter and the fourth quarter, or where we are now, is, you know, third quarter is still very much an estimate. And so my practice has always been to take a more conservative approach on revenues and a more conservative approach on expenses when I'm still doing the projecting, because I have had to be in the situation of explaining to a committee or a council that, while I thought we were going to be fine, we have an umpty $1 million deficit. Mm-hmm. That's a terrible conversation. Mm-hmm. It's always a terrible conversation. Taking a conservative estimating approach and being off in the other direction from a projection standpoint or an estimating standpoint is far preferable. And so looking at those revenues or looking at the expenses there wasn't any one thing, but it was a consistent, like, let's not over-project what we see on revenues because we don't know what's going to happen in the fourth quarter. And let's not under-project on expenditures because departments often do pick up spending toward the end of the year, and we do see that in some of the departments. And so, again, I was like, particularly because this is my first full year, or not even when did I get here? January? My first full 8 months of budget experience here in the city of Albany. And so I did not want to overstate the savings that I thought departments were going to achieve. So that's kind of how we, I would say, didn't see it coming, in the sense of, like, I could see that it might be coming, but I didn't want to set the expectation of, like, hey, we're going to be $1 million ahead, and then we're 300,000 ahead, and everybody's like, where's my 700,000?
Right.
Like, you
Under
took it
promise,
away
over
from
deliver.
me. Yeah, a little bit of under promise, over deliver. On the was there something on franchise?
Franchise taxes specifically, so as part of the new month close process, we started in April, I think was when we rolled that out? I think so. April. I started doing a revenue tracker, and that's helped to keep a better handle month to month on the revenues that are coming in. And the franchise taxes come in quarterly. Because of that tracker, I actually identified there was, I think, 2 franchise taxes that are also utility vendors, and it was misclassified from December and the third quarter payment as utility tax instead. So we did reclass that. So if you were running your projection off of franchise tax before that was identified, and I think I caught that in June, it would have been understated. That's another thing that would have led to franchise specifically.
So, I guess follow-on question, now that we know that utility users' tax is $600,000 over what we thought it would be for this fiscal year, is it fair to project that into next year as being higher than we have it budgeted for currently?
It's actually about 300,000 higher. We had anticipated there would be about a $600,000 bump from the Measure DD changes, and there was a $937,000 bump or so. So again, that's significant. I mean, it's a third more than we anticipated. As we look at mid-year FY25, so the end of this calendar year, beginning of next calendar year, and we look at, are there budget adjustments we need to make to create a balanced budget? In that case, assuming that the next, 5 months of payments that we'll have between now and then look similar to what happened this year, yes, we can make that adjustment as part of the budget balancing at mid-year. Cautiously, I would also suggest that we'll also see what 5 months of sales tax looks like, and we'll know whether the estimates that we have for sales tax based on Golden Gate Fields closing, et cetera, how close we are on those. So yes, there could be Measure DD funds or utility user tax revenues that can go up, but there may be other sources of revenue that do not fare so well by the mid-year. So we will look at all of those in preparing whatever adjustments are needed to close the second half of fiscal year 25.
Makes sense.
Going forward, which of the revenue streams that we aware of that we had this last year would change? Golden Gate Fields, how much would that change in terms of the budget for next year? Did we use any ARPA funds this year that incorporated as part of our budget? And will those be gone? I'd like to know exactly what the timetable was for that and will be in the future. I guess the only other one major, I'm curious, do you have an idea of what a new finance director might cost as in change? I'm assuming we have no idea, but these are just the things that I'm immediately aware of.
Okay, I will do my best, and I might do them in opposite order. The finance director position is fully budgeted in the budget, and so there is no change from a budget perspective that I would anticipate associated with the new finance director. We will be really launching the recruitment later this month, and so we hope to have someone on. My hope is that we have someone on by January, before I run out of hours. I won't run out of hours by then, but so no budget change, and I would say relatively little actual change. I mean, I'm a little bit cheaper because I'm hourly only. I get no benefits. I get no anything else. But the budget itself, or the actuals over the last 12 months to 24 months, you're not going to see a huge change associated with a new director coming in. So that's the first question. Your second question was about ARPA. There isn't anything in the general fund that is captured in these general fund numbers that is ARPA funded. ARPA funding is entirely separate. The total amount of ARPA funding received by the city has to be all obligated, encumbered by the end of 2024, so this year, and must be fully spent by December of 2026. The city still has a fair amount of ARPA funding left. It's been used for tenant support, business support, a few other programs, and there will be a report that comes back to the council on ARPA funding later this year. I don't remember exactly when, but sometime like late fall, early winter, there will be a annual summary on the use of ARPA funds. But the city did a good job of essentially segregating those funds to not be used for what are anticipated to be ongoing costs. They're one-time costs, one-time program costs that the goal is to fund those with ARPA and not have ARPA pay for things that we then immediately need to backfill with general fund. You may have followed the council's action to put a measure on the ballot in November, which would implement if passed, additional business license tax on landlords, which with the goal of, as ARPA funds decline, that those funds come in and capture some of the same programmatic goals with respect to support for tenants, support for the housing market, et cetera. But there isn't anything that is an ongoing general fund program that was funded by ARPA. So those have been kept separate. Some jurisdictions did plow money essentially into paying for staff positions that would be ongoing beyond the term of the ARPA funds, but that's not the case for Albany, which is a good thing. The first question you asked was about some revenue thing, right?
Golden Gate Field.
Golden Gate Fields, thank you.
And when did that revenue stream stop? I mean, it stopped exactly last month or 2 months ago?
The end of June is when the racetrack closed. We received, in the past, a few types of revenue associated with Golden Gate Fields. A racetrack tax, which is a very specific, only came as a result of the racetrack. and sales tax from businesses that were at Golden Gate Fields. When we brought the adjustments for this fiscal year's budget to the council, we reduced the sales tax revenue overall by approximately 200,000, I want to say, which was a reflection of the loss that we anticipate. It's probably between 200 and 300 between the racetrack tax, don't say that too quickly, and the sales tax. But we did adjust the FY25 budget for what we estimated the impact of that would be. So the council took that action in June. And we, of course, are watching the sales tax receipts quite closely to see if that was a good estimate or not. But we do know that those businesses probably accounted for at least a couple $100,000 in sales tax revenues. But we did adjust the budget. So the 25 budget already takes account of that to the best we could estimate it.
So one of the unanticipated revenue streams was from energy tax.
Utility user
Utilities
tax.
tax. Now, the water bill went, I believe, from 0 to 7.5%, correct?
From 0 to 7.5? Yeah. Yes.
So, and when did that start? When did we start collecting that?
2020, it was after the 22 election? It's in the staff report because,
I mean, there were some of these I kind of recall where you said, well, we got enacted, but it's going to take a certain period of time.
it was passed in November 2020, and
So the first full year would have been 22.
yes, I'm just trying to see if it had, I don't have the effective date, but it would have been, so the first budget year that we would have had, it would have been FY22, yes.
Okay, and the electric bill went from 7% to 9.5%. So it would appear that at least that one would be, I mean, wouldn't both of these be closely estimatable? Because we received it already, so now we're going to be, unless there was a drastic change in the use of utilities, that, what was the change in use of utilities that brought in that extra 600,000?
It isn't, well, we anticipated that the change in rates would bring in about 600,000. We took in an additional 300,000 beyond that. So it's this approximately 300,000 that we're talking about. A big chunk of that is we don't know in advance by any stretch what the utility rates are going to do because it's a percentage of the bill. So as the utilities raise their cost, as your utility bill goes up, what you pay in UUT, our tax, goes up. And so estimating it is always, I mean, that's even more of a difficult one to estimate because we don't, not only do we not know what, I mean, is it going to be a hot summer, a cold summer, a hot winter, a cold winter? Those things all affect usage, but also the utility rates. And we don't have those anywhere near in advance enough to really be able to model that behavior. So that's the other piece.
Does it include telecommunications?
It does, it includes one component of telecom, right? Telephone? Telecom's still at 6.5%. There was no change.
How about my internet access through Sonic?
I would have to look at the way the ordinance is written for Albany. Every jurisdiction is different as to what it determines is telecommunications, and the laws and regulations around what can be construed as telecom keep changing. So I'd have to look it up. I wouldn't want to give you my sense, but so I don't know if your internet bill is or not. You think?
Well, it kind of keeps creeping up. All these things kind of creep up, and I just go, okay, auto pay. So I haven't been, delving close into it, because what can I do about it? I'm happy with the service. What I'm driving at is that the more, well, now I understand, thank you for clarifying that, as the utility company raises rates, the bills go up, and we charge a percentage of that. So the more the utility companies charge the consumer, the more we make. And the more that we use, the more we make. And so if, for instance, if it's a cold winter and people use more utility, or a hot summer and they use more air conditioning, whatever, then the consumer has to pay more, and we benefit as a city in terms of revenue.
We do. We are also a consumer, so our light bill goes up just like your light bill goes up. And so there is a revenue gain, but we also fare the same every time PG&E raises their rates, and
Right,
go like
but
that.
the city doesn't pay the tax, does it?
The city doesn't pay the tax, but just your bill goes up because
Right.
PG&E raises its rates. Our bill goes up.
And if the schools district's bill do they pay utility taxes? Do we
Yes.
get revenue on their utility bill?
Should, because they're a utility customer. Whatever PG&E charges, again, I always default to saying read the code to make sure that I'm not spinning a tale. But typically, if a customer bill goes up, our 7.5%, 7%, 9%, whatever it is, goes up.
No, I understand, but it was good to clarify that the school, which has separate, but in this part, we do actually tax their utility bills. The city reaps revenue
Yes.
from the school's utility
We'll
bills.
confirm that, but
Okay,
generally speaking, yes, they're a utility customer,
okay.
just like we're a utility customer.
Now, the final and big question is, where is the $1.1 million surplus? And what are we going to do with it?
It is in the bank? No, I'm not sure I understand the question about where is it. Right now, it's an estimate of where the budget will end, but it's sitting, just like if you made a budget and you didn't spend all of it, it would still be sitting in your bank account. So it's sitting in our bank account. Once we're all the way through the audit and we know what that final number is, the council will have, as part of their action related to the audit, the opportunity, if there's a surplus, to determine what the ultimate outcome is for the surplus.
I forgot when it was, but there was a proposal that we had as a group to get the city council to use, I think it was close to $1 million surplus, to pay down the unfunded pension liability. Are you aware of that? I think it was before you were here. And then there was all of this, well, we're going to set it aside, and we're going to see, there was this kind of paper shuffling of whether it would be or could be utilized, and I never really figured it out. So in the budget that when it gets audited, or can you point to a point in this budget where any direct payments went to pay down the unfunded pension liability?
In the last 18 months, there hasn't been an additional payment made to PERS toward the unfunded liability other than the required annual payment. The council did, by resolution, set aside $775,000 in a, we call it a reserve from an auditing standpoint. It's not technically a reserve, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. It's set aside. We don't touch it. It's there with the council designation that it be held for potential use in paying pension costs. The council has not made any subsequent decisions about what to do with that, but it is still held aside with a tag on it that says, use me for pensions.
750 was that? Or
75.
75.
And when would that be decided about what to do with that money? Is there a point that we can now plan on that, well, there's a deadline that something will be done, or another postponement might happen, or what?
So the council can make that decision at any time. The next most, what I would say, there are two things kind of coming that might trigger a conversation where the council would either choose to just keep it as a reserve or potentially put it toward pension costs. One is, again, when we hit the end of the audit process and the council's making a more general determination about whether there are reserve amounts to set up or change or add to. That's one piece. The second piece is that we are working in preparation for the next budget cycle on a policy related to pension and OPEB, other post-employment benefits, funding. So this is something that we've talked about here, as well as with the council, but a pension and OPEB funding policy would essentially provide a framework for determining, priority, order of payment, potential mechanisms of payment, because there are a number of ways that funding could be used to address pension costs. So that will likely come before the committee/council late this calendar year, or more likely in probably January of next year, in preparation for a full launch of the budget process for 26 and 27.
I didn't quite hear, it would come before this committee or the council, or both?
I don't know exactly what the process is going to be, but typically it would, if it follows sort of a normal process, it would come to this committee and then to the council. Of course, that all depends on timing and a few other things, but that would be the process that we've seen in the past.
And when you say "we," you mean you and the city manager? Or you and
In terms
Sandra
of
and the city manager?
we bringing it forward or
No, you said
developing it?
we were coming up with this plan, of how to deal with the
Pension and
pensions.
OPEB funding policy?
Yes, who is doing that?
Actually, GovInvest is helping us, so the company, GovInvest,
The ones that did the
company,
presentation here.
yeah, they have helped a number of jurisdictions with pension and OPEB funding policies. And so they will help us develop a policy for Albany that makes sense for Albany, but using their expertise gained from a bunch of other jurisdictions. So we benefit from everybody who's done it already. So staff will work with GovInvest to put together a draft policy, and then it'll go through all of the review processes.
Which would include coming to this committee at some point?
Yeah, I mean, typically it would. I mean,
Okay.
Well, typically is kind of sometimes wishful thinking, it appears, sometimes with certain issues. So that's what we would like. I mean, I think I would like, and I'm sure the entire group would like, some clarity about this so that we could then,
I think we can just direct staff that it'd be a priority for us to be able to review it before it goes
I
before
hear
city
that
council.
feedback.
Yes, there we go. And the same goes for what to do with, if there's going to be a conversation at the city council level about what to do with surplus, we would like the opportunity.
Typically, the audit comes here first, so yes,
Okay,
that would be part of that conversation, because we don't really know what the number is until we hit that point.
okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to reflect on the fact that, Marina, I feel like you're on the Inquisition here, and I hate to ask another question.
It's all good.
Okay. I want to drill a little bit deeper on the ARPA question. You said that we needed to be fully expended by 2026, and you also indicated that the staff and council had done a good job of sequestering those funds in a lot of ways. But my question is it a real person's job, and what is that real person's job? And how is that going to be changed in 2026? Because we do have an important ballot measure before us, and I want to understand fully, and I'd like the public to understand fully what the implications are of continuing to fund the services that have been provided under ARPA. So if you can enlighten me.
I will give you my best shot. I am not the Albany ARPA expert, but I know a fair amount about it. There is, I believe, one position that we established for the sort of tenant housing support under contract, but Kate's an employee, right? That position, I believe, was hired with the understanding that it's this program, and this program lasts this long, and then it's not a program anymore. And so that, as far as I know, there's one position that's associated with that program. Now, if that program is morphed into something that is supported by the upcoming ballot measure, if that's approved, then the council would need to make a decision about how to continue shaping that tenant support, housing support program, whether they still wanted to have a staff person who was handling that, or if they wanted to do something else with it, contract with a nonprofit for some, I mean, there are a variety of ways to run those programs. So that would be the one piece of sort of staff interaction with that. But it was anticipated at the time that the position was added that it was tied to the funding source, and the funding source was limited, and not only dollar limited, but time limited. Unless everybody's forgotten it, I'm pretty sure they hired her with this is your program for this
Thank you.
period.
So it's possible to envision a world in which the budget surplus that have been making your comfort level a little higher could also accommodate that kind of a programming without an increase in revenue stream through a new tax. I'm just making commentary. I'm not asking for a response. But it does appear that there are consistent budget surpluses, possibly intentional, so that we don't get to the situation where we're in a place where we're talking about laying off people. But when we're talking about raising taxes, we need to be clear that there are potentially other sources of revenue to pay for that. So that is a commentary. That's not requiring your response. And then just to clarify a little bit further on the ARPA reporting timeline, is there a report due before the end of the year on ARPA? Do you know for sure? No, okay.
The federal reporting timelines are April annually for a city the size of the city of Albany. But I believe that there is a plan to bring a report to the city council from staff on sort of, year in review, et cetera, that I think is scheduled for later this calendar year.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Just two quick.
How can you
Question
have any
comments.
questions? No,
So one is just I'm embarrassed to say I don't know the answer to this, but when we compare budget to actual, there's several budgets, right? Because there's the original budget and then the budget gets revised over time. When we compare, like, for example, in this last round to budget, is it the most recent fully revised budget? Okay. So that gets revised every time. Like when you say, we're going to look at the franchise tax and we may revise the budget or whatever.
typically, the budget gets adopted, it gets revised at mid-year if there's a requirement to make any changes. Occasionally, there are other adjustments at other times of year if something extraordinary happens, but typically, budget gets adopted, it gets revised midway through the year if needed, and that becomes your revised budget, and we're, for these purposes, always comparing against revised budget.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question is regarding the transfers in. So when I saw,
Love transfers, no, I'm just kidding.
when I saw that $1 million less was transferred in and there was still a budget surplus, I thought, oh, well, that's great news, because in my mind, there's some special fund or special funds with piles of money, and $2 million was supposed to be siphoned out of there and put into the general fund, and it only needed $1 million. So there's more money essentially sitting in that pile of special funds than we thought was going to be in the budget. Is that fair?
Generally speaking, yes. Those special funds can still only be spent on the special purposes for which they're raised, and often, particularly in the public works realm, if there are projects that come in under budget in total, the proportion of general fund to special funds typically remains the same, but so if the overall cost is lower, we don't transfer as much in because the expense wasn't as high. But that does leave a greater balance in those special revenue funds for projects and programs in future years, which is good. And we typically, not to say typically, in many of the smaller special fund transfers into public works, they're not intended to be fully expended every year anyway. Oftentimes, they may be putting funds toward a future capital project. So, they would not anticipate spending all of their special revenue funds in a year or 2 years. Maybe they're planning for a project 3 years out or whatever it is. So, yes, those special revenue funds stay in their special places and are available in future years for similar projects and programs.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your
Welcome.
very thorough report.
Can I ask 2 more questions?
No.
Sorry.
We're going to go around again. We're going to go all the way around again.
We had a summer to store these all up, come on.
Go ahead.
We're rusty.
Yep. Oh, no throwing tomatoes at staff. This is the one thing I will request, please. Anyway, how may I help you, member trainer?
2 other questions about the expense side of the budget versus actual. So the unanticipated expenses in general government, there was just a comment that there were some unanticipated expenses in general government that caused that particular department line item to go over budget. That was the only one that went over budget. The others were under. And was insurance one of those unanticipated things in that line item that caused that overage, or?
Insurance is one, preparation for ballot measures was another, and then there was a third, which is escaping me at the moment, but they were all, I know what the other one was. The other thing that happened is, so a few years ago, there was a large settlement with Monsanto related to water quality, and jurisdictions had the option of either going after Monsanto on their own or accepting this settlement agreement. Albany accepted the settlement agreement. The city received $225,000 for that in 2023. That is intended for clean water purposes, so it's required to be spent on sort of clean water purposes. And it was received in 2023 and recorded in the general fund. So 2023 had this $225,000 additional revenue that really belonged in the storm drain fund. And so we had an unanticipated expense in the general fund to move it to the storm drainage fund. So it never should have gone into the general fund to begin with. So it went in and then it went out because it didn't belong there. But it's one of those things where, okay, you have to count it as an expense because we counted it as revenue in a prior year. We have to move it to the storm drainage fund. What that means is there's this unanticipated $225,000 expense that, of course, never had a budget because we didn't anticipate getting it into the general fund. It should have been deposited in the storm drain fund. So it's kind of an administrative correction, but it shows up as a $225,000 expense that doesn't have a home. So it becomes an unanticipated expense. That was the other significant one that we had. It's now sitting in the storm drain fund where it belongs, waiting to be spent on clean water purposes. So,
Got it. And then in the other departments that were basically under budget across the board, and I know you talked about sort of holding the line on expenses and things, but was there also a component of that that was staffing vacancies leading to those departments all being under budget?
not a lot, quite frankly. The staffing and vacancies, so if you looked at the salaries and wages lines, that was about 2.5% below budget. Other expenses were farther below budget. And so it was, in some cases, it was programs or projects that didn't cost as much as anticipated, or things that weren't completed in the one-year time frame of the budget that the departments are still working on in future years, now current year budget, but it's not as much a staffing issue as it has been in the past when we've seen departmental operational savings.
Okay, thank you.
Inquisition on that item over?
I'm not sure because of public comment, so that's not.
Okay, well, you know, you have, is there any public comment? Oh, Mr. Bone is up late.
Okay, ready for public comment?
Greg Bone, you may unmute and speak.
I have, and thank you. I'm still up. I had a comment. It could go into the next segment, but I'll take the opportunity here. I don't quite know what to think about this. We had Kerr and Trainer stand up before the council and I think make a very strong presentation for fiscal responsibility. And I completely support what they're doing as a retiree. I think it's the responsible thing. They're supposed to provide the council with good financial advice on how to run the city properly. And I think what they said was reasonable. And I think the letter, I guess, internal memo to the FAC, which is going to be brought up in the next segment, really outlines some very good points. But I kind of see a problem here because, you know, they're standing up there in front of council and they make very valid points. And I thought they were kind of treated dismissively. I think that was a good word. It's mentioned in the memo. And yet, you know, all of a sudden now we're looking at $1 million surplus potentially. And what, a couple of months ago, they're standing up and giving the best advice they can about being cautious about spending. And I think there was a little pushback from one of the committee members on, I think it was $50,000 commitment to spend money on some project. I'm not sure what it was at this point. But, you know, and all of a sudden now, we're looking at $1 million surplus. So how do they keep credibility? How does this committee keep credibility when this happens? And Kerr and Trainer, are they going to stand up there and do this again? I mean, I see kind of a disincentive to do that now, and that really is a function of this FAC committee, the way I see it. And I don't know if it's a style thing. Maybe they're caught in a vortex of under promise and over deliver. I don't know. But I do see a problem, and I hope there can be some corrective action taken, because I can see a lot of reluctance going forward by FAC members to take strong positions on things if these numbers shift like this. So that's my comment at this point. I don't know the solution, but I view this committee as very, very valuable, and it has to have credibility. And I think I didn't see it being delivered. I think it was undercut, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I think it's just the way things worked out. But I do think you have to have credibility going forward. And I don't know how you achieve it, but there's got to be maybe better communication. But thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another public comment?
Dwayne?
Good evening.
Oh, yes.
Hi, good evening. I did have a question. I'm sorry, I was late, so I'm not sure if this was answered. But my question, the Lions, this whole, the cross thing, that the city put aside 100,000, is that part of, have you put, is that anything that you've described tonight with all this money that you're talking about, the extra $1 million or anything? And if it should go over, if the judge comes back and says that they owe more than where does that money come from? Thank you, and I appreciate your committee too. Thank you.
I didn't understand the first part of that comment. Could people hear the very first part of that
Get
comment?
cut out.
$100,000 of something, that's what I heard.
Is it a legal settlement regarding the cross?
Can we get
Yes.
her to restate that?
But what I was able to hear was she was asking if the general fund included any legal reserves for the cross settlement on the Hill. So
For what settlement?
there's a legal action about the cross on Albany Hill.
Oh,
She was wondering if we were in discussion about any funds related to that.
oh.
That's how I understood the question.
Okay.
I can't speak at this point to any legal settlement pieces, so that's something, if the council has discussed it, we'll come to public session at some point if that's relevant. But I don't have that information.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So let's take a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back at 8:15. Discussion and possible action on matters related to presentation to the city council meeting on June 17th. So I think
Okay.
probably fair to let the people who were there and spoke start the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about this now, about almost 3 months after the fact. At the time, I was pretty upset about after that meeting, just to be frank. I felt that 3 minutes, given to each of us was just a ridiculously short amount of time. I feel pretty strongly that this committee needs to have more time in front of the council where we can give an actual presentation and have a real conversation with them, as opposed to just having our 3 minutes and then feeling bulldozed by the council. You can read what we said in there, but I did have a follow-up conversation with Council Member Jordan. That was really productive conversation, and he committed to having us give a presentation at the strategy type meeting that the council does in roughly the January timeframe. And then there are a couple other points in time where we could have the ability to present to the council. And I think that we, as a committee, need to start really thinking about preparing for those meetings, with the January one being the first meeting, and putting together a presentation, slide deck, deciding what points we want to emphasize. And then also to Bones' point, I do feel kind of chastened, going before them now saying, well, it's, the deficit really will materialize this time, and then it didn't. And it was off by $1 million the other way. So I feel like that takes a little bit of the wind out of our sails in making that argument.
I was equally struck by the tone that we encountered when we talked to the council on June 17th. But I think it's important to reflect a little more deeply, Kim, with regard to the real-world implications of the council not trusting budget projections. Because here we are with a budget surplus, which is what essentially council members were telling us they anticipated because they had had that experience in years past. But at the same time, we have a ballot initiative that was rushed through to increase taxes. So and my thinking on this is if we had an accurate portrayal of where we were financially throughout the 4 quarters of the year, we'd be better able to plan. It's not how I felt in front of the council or how they received what we were doing. It's the reality of the choices that we have to make with the information available. So I would really hope that, and I do understand, that staff want to present a budget that has room for, potential changes and what was the phrase?
Under promise.
Under promise, over deliver, or over deliver, under promise. I think those are two sides of the same coin, which we're not spending. And I think it's a philosophy that we should look at and we should talk about. And how does it serve us, and how does it not honor what we need to do as a community in terms of taxing ourselves? That's kind of how I look at it at this 3-month juncture, hence.
Yeah, so well, first of all, I agree with the point that, our credibility is really of utmost importance here, right? Because otherwise anything we say is going to be for naught. And I agree that essentially treated like any other person in the public, as opposed to someone who spent hours and hours and hours over the years reviewing the city's finances, doesn't show a lot of respect for the time and expertise we've put in to understand the city's finances and have a point of view about them. So I agree that we need a different process, and a process that gives us more time to really interact with the city council, so that it's not just here's what we think, but also what's going on, and we can go back and forth a little bit. And the other thing that I guess I was struck by a little bit is that it seems like the city council is thinking in a 1 or 2 year time frame. But I think a lot of what maybe animates some of us is a 5-year time frame.
Exactly.
And so maybe the strategic planning is the right place as opposed to the budgeting, you know, the more immediate stuff, because it really is more long-term structural problems that I think, at least for me, seem like the concern. And so maybe, is that what happens at strategic planning? How far out do people, does the city strategically plan in strategic planning?
The process has typically been that it's a 2-year, it's kind of a goal-setting process for a 2-year strategic plan,
Okay.
which always has tails that continue long beyond the 2 years,
Right.
but it's set up for the new council to adopt until there's another new council seated potentially. So that's why the 2-year timeframe is typically in. But many of the things that are part of the strategic plan last far longer than a 2-year timeframe. So I wouldn't put as much emphasis maybe on the fact that it's a 2-year strategic plan. It's still, I think, a good place to have a long-term discussion.
Okay. So how would we go about essentially getting on the agenda for that strategic plan if that's what we all want, if that's something we agree we want to do?
At this point, I will have to defer to a future conversation I will have with the city manager
Okay.
in terms of how she is working with the mayor on setting the timing and agenda for the strategic planning session. So typically they would identify a session to have a strategic planning meeting. Once that date is known, you would have your firm target of when you were planning, if you're, able to do a presentation at that. But I don't have that. There's no date that's been set yet, so it's typically in the early part of the calendar year.
Okay, so I guess first maybe let's poll the committee and see if that's something that we're interested in doing and participating in.
Well, I just wanted to comment to the committee to remind us all how new a committee this is. And there hasn't really been a chance for us to participate in this in the past, in this strategic planning sessions, because we weren't around. There was no Finance Advisory Committee prior. I don't believe we've lived through a cycle that would allow that. So I think it's something that probably the city manager hasn't really had experience with before, but I'd like us to have maybe a consensus opinion that we believe we belong at the table, and we would like to respectfully request presence at that table.
I agree.
I do too.
How do you feel?
So a strategic plan that doesn't include a plan for the unfunded pension liability is not a plan. It's half a plan. It's not even, it's, for years now, I've been advocating that as part of every budget, we actually have in bold or in a very clear location on the budget, it says unfunded actuarial liability / unfunded pension liability, $49 million. And under it, have what is our interest payment that we have to make for that debt that we have. I recently, this afternoon, I sent to the FAC, because I was trying to figure out how to get this all shared, an article about how 5 cities in the state of California has been dealing with their unfunded pension liability. did a quick, it was a tough Google, because I kept Googling this question. And anyway, it literally explained in this article by the, I'll find it, California, brought it with me, of the savings that's accrued over 5 years, that certain cities had made this multi-million-dollar or a yearly million-dollar plus input to pay off their unfunded bill.
Can I just interrupt for a second? I feel like you're jumping to what we would say, but let's just talk about, do we want to be at the strategic plan?
Well, having the plan for the, for that is, I didn't hear that mentioned. I thought we were talking about strategic plan for the budget versus,
Well, the budget includes payments for unfunded liability.
So the strategic planning
it
session.
hasn't so
that-
far. So, right, I mean, so the whole time we've been in existence, there hasn't been, if am I correct, any input into the unfunded pension liability, trying to
so-
reduce it. Just want to be clear, is that not a fact?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, CalPERS charges the city every year for a part of that unfunded liability. And so the city has been paying off that unfunded liability. They have not been, or maybe once, but not really been making extra payments to further pay it down beyond what is required by CalPERS. But part of what I think we're talking about is that the required payments by CalPERS are anticipated to go up quite a bit, not just next year, but I mean, in a more medium-term to long-term outlook.
The problem is we're on a 5 to 10 year arc where those payments will increase exponentially. And so using a 2-year plan doesn't factor that in.
Right.
But back to your point about, should we be at that session? I think absolutely that, because that will inform biennial budget
Right.
process.
Right.
If we can get a seat at the table at that meeting and discuss the need for longer-term thinking than 2 years, because we have these large looming payments. And there are other issues too that I think we tend to get focused on the pension, but there's the capital reserve, right? And the funding, all of the capital reserve funding is pretty underfunded as well. And there are big dollars there. Of course, that's not a CalPERS mandate. That's just something that we should do for good governance and make sure that we have the funds when we need new equipment and that sort of thing. But there are many, many things, but I think the question is, do we want to, make a pitch to be included at that meeting whenever that happens? And I think we should be there, because those discussions will be what shapes the next biennial budget.
I agree. So I'm assuming you agree that we
Yes.
should be there. Okay. So then I think so the two questions is, one, how do we try to make that happen? And I take it the next step is for you to talk to the city manager. Is that what you said?
Yes, and we will reflect in the minutes from this meeting that there was assuming I have heard correctly, so
Right.
this is why I restated, a consensus that the committee would like to be a defined part of the strategic plan
Right.
discussion when the council has that.
Okay. And then I think for the next meeting, there should be an agenda item where we talk about the process for developing. I agree that we would need some kind of coordinated presentation, and with the Brown Act and so forth, I don't know if there's going to be a subcommittee or if they're going to do it all at once or all together in a committee meeting or whatever, but maybe an agenda item at the next committee meeting where we discuss how we're going to go about, assuming we do get to participate, how we're going to go about developing a plan for that strategic plan participation.
I think that's a great idea, and I think what we can do is if we have that, if we know when that, we're going to do that,
Right.
then the different subcommittees can work together on
They're pieces.
their piece,
There
exactly.
you go. Okay.
So
there-
we have September, the October 4th, November, we can discuss future
Right,
agenda.
I mean,
Do
let's,
we have October, November, and December, 3 meetings?
yeah.
Yes.
Yes. What I'm hearing is that at the October 4th meeting, you would like an agenda item reflecting the consensus that you all want to place at the table. That's my shorthand. I will describe it more eloquently than that. And that the purpose of the item at the next FAC meeting would be to talk about the process of developing essentially the content. And so that might be more subcommittees, that might be subcommittee work, that might be work in the group as a whole. But you will be able to talk through all of those components with such an agenda item on your next agenda, if that's what you wish.
Yes. You got it.
Check.
Check.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else on this from the committee?
I think we should just all contemplate that before the next meeting, is what we think the important topics are that would need to be included there. And I could see where definitely the pension subcommittee has things to say, the revenue subcommittee has things to say, but then there are other things that aren't necessarily covered by those two committees. So we'll have to decide how we settle on those other points.
And maybe this is obvious, but my plan will be to go back and read the strategic plan from the last planning session to acquaint myself with the format and the content so that I know how my role as a revenue subcommittee member might advise the process and the strategic plan. So that'll be my homework to do.
Is the strategic plan done only every 2 years before the budget cycle?
That has been what the city's practice has been.
It's a good idea.
Good idea. Any public comment?
Too late.
Is that a,
Still logged on, so he's probably still awake, unless he's snoozing at his
Coast, right?
computer.
Yes.
so, no, oh, yes.
There he is. All right.
Yay.
Okay. Let's have some public comment.
Greg, you may speak.
Gregory Bone, retired police. Just to let you know, I'm still awake and following the discussion, and I applaud the progress you're making on this point. Great committee, good work, great finance department. So get this sorted out and just get down the road on all this. But again, I think it's absolutely necessary the committee has credibility. You're bright people doing hard work, and so I applaud the work you do. So thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 7, subcommittee updates. So the first one is from the pension subcommittee. We have not met, so no update there. The revenue subcommittee.
Well, I have something on two revenue issues that just kind of for information. That's related to us and our work. So there are two tax measures on the ballot. One, which would impose a business license, an additional business license tax on the gross rental income of housing providers on their gross income, and if it is if they have, is it 5 units and above, it's at 1% of their gross revenue, including things like laundry, I believe, and parking if those are all additional. And then there is, and 0.36% for less than 5. There's also another ballot measure about a sidewalk tax, which I apologize, I don't have the specifics of because I wasn't that closely involved with it. But the point I'm bringing up is that these are two revenue taxes that was put by the city council without any input from us. I think it speaks kind of volumes as to how they want to, at this time, the present makeup of the city council majority, whether they want our input. And one of them in particular appears to me and others that it was kind of rushed to get on the ballot because they actually, here's the dichotomy of it all, that they needed to get it on the ballot because they needed to get it passed right away because they needed to get the money to cover this rental assistance program, even though they didn't believe that we were going to have a deficit, supposedly. So I don't get it. So there wasn't going to be a deficit, but we need to get this passed literally by the end of the year. That's why it's there on the November ballot, and probably why it wasn't sent to any other committees for review, particularly ours, which is, I thought, one of the basic ones. But so I just wanted to put that so you understand that maybe as part of our process that we need to be, that we need to talk with our appointors, perhaps, to find out why we weren't consulted. As a matter of fact, I was a party to an endorsement meeting for the city council members and the school board. And a question was forwarded to the people running for office as to how they felt they could, wanted to deal with projected budget deficits and the unfunded pension liability. And one of the council members who's running for re-election said literally the best way to address that pretty much is by putting new revenue measures on every ballot. That's verbatim. Mm-hmm. And as a member of the Revenue Committee, I want us to be thinking as a Financial Advisory Committee that there's more than one way to get revenue. One is taxes, and the other is to bring in new sources of revenue to the city, not taxing the people who are already here. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Update from the Dashboard Metrics Subcommittee. We did not meet. Is there public comment on item 7? He's shaking no. Okay. So item 8, future agenda items. So I know we added one this time around, which was to talk about assuming that we get a green light to participate in the City Council strategic plan, that we'll discuss how we'll participate in that. What else is on our schedule? for
Yep.
October?
So we do have our investment manager preparing to make a presentation at the October meeting as well. So they will be here to present on the investment results.
Okay.
So that is the other item we have slated, and then I believe Q1, potentially November. Q1 budget review in November as well.
Okay. Is there anything else that folks would like to add to the agenda?
Before I would love it if the city manager could come and give us kind of an overview about how they're choosing the new finance director. Because I think for the first time, we'd have a chance to give some input as to how our experience has been with finance directors and how we can best work with finance director. I think one of the issues in the past was that the finance director didn't really know what the relationship was going to be with us. And so it was an awkward situation. But basically, it would be great to hear from the city manager, if you would like to hear from the city manager about the process.
Yeah, I know that that in general, the advisory committees don't get involved in hiring. And so I'm not sure what our role really is. I don't know. Is this something that's happened before for the city manager to talk about, hiring a new police officer, or that the police oversight or any, no?
The hiring piece is pretty much held entirely separate. It has not come in front of the advisory committees, police here, et cetera.
Is there another way to give feedback to hiring, folks who are doing the hiring?
For example, what comes to mind for me is the possibility that we could agendize this item, not with anyone else present, but come up with a list of questions or statement of values or something that would reflect our input as to what works and what doesn't, what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what we hope to see going forward. We wouldn't need a city manager to have us tell us what we think. We could just do that. So, I mean, I think that would be, whether it would be used or whether it would go anywhere besides our conversation, we can't control, but we still could do it.
Okay. So that would be an agenda item for next time?
Yeah, if that's the pleasure of the table, yeah.
How far along in the process would the hiring already be next meeting?
By October 2nd, the recruitment will be launched, but will be well within the application period. So we won't have gotten applications.
Okay. I mean, I think,
Is there just, so it's a public posting, right? So
It'll
it
be
says,
posted, I believe, September 23rd.
and would there be a description of something about what they do? And
There'll be a brochure that talks about the city, the position, the organization, et cetera. And that'll get posted on a million places for that people look for government jobs. And then the applications will come into the city and we'll complete the rest of the process. But it's about a 3 to 4 week application period. It's a pretty long application period. So it'll launch toward the end of September and conclude like the 3rd week in October, I think.
so it sounds like there's time, so I'd be happy to put that on the agenda if I just encourage people to, come to the meeting with ideas of questions or thoughts.
brief item on the agenda. You can
Brief
hold-
item.
Yes, I want you to hold this in a tight time frame. I liked it when
I
you
will
did
love that.
Okay?
Okay.
I don't want this is not a long discussion, just
Okay.
to make the
We'll have a
points.
robust October meeting with the investment advisor
Yeah.
coming and the potential strategic plan
Strategic plan.
and finance director. So just
Okay,
buckle up. It's a tight 2 hours.
okay, got it. Public, you won't be, oh, okay.
You
So
will
be out
have
of town.
Cassie, and you will most likely have Isabel Leduc, the assistant city manager.
Okay. Do we do public comment on future agenda items? No. Okay, so agenda item 9, the next meeting is Wednesday, October 2nd. Same bat time, same bat place, 7 o'clock, right here. And it is 43, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.